Hello there, Atheist Junior here, your friend and humble narrator. And today, I'm finally adding a new installment in my interview series. And I'm here with a very special and esteemed guest, Dr. Josh Bowen from the YouTube channel Digital Hammurabi. So, Dr. Josh received his education at Johns Hopkins, and he has a master's in Old Testament studies and a PhD in ancient Near Eastern studies, as well as Assyriology. He's also an author, and his most recent work is the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. So if you like this interview, check out his channel and consider pledging to his Patreon page. I'll have all of his donation links and social media links down below in a pinned comment. So Dr. Josh, thank you so much for coming on my channel. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so I know that you published a new book this year, the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. And last year you published a book that you and your wife, Megan, had written together called Learn to Read Ancient Sumerian for the Absolute Beginner. So is the writing process a lot different when you work together versus just like being the primary author and writing by yourself?
It's a good question. It's a lot more relaxing when we do it together. So this is my fourth book that I've published in the last 2 years. And actually, I just finished the fifth one, which is volume 2 of that Sumerian grammar. And with the other 3 books that I wrote on my own, there's a lot more weight, I think, on myself to get everything right. So she edits, she goes and corrects things. So
One moment. Guys, we lost Dr. Josh. Probably going to get a tissue.
This is the part where you need to juggle.
I don't know how to juggle.
Throw things up.
Well, did he have to go off to get a tissue or something?
I don't know.
Dr. Josh, come back. I think I hear him.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
That has never happened to me before. I don't know, there's the season change or something is making my allergies kick up. So
I sympathize.
But yeah, so I guess with the Sumerian stuff, like I have a significant piece that I do. I kind of deal with all the grammar, writing all the parts of the chapter that are like, how does this Sumerian grammatical form work? But then her part is really honing in on like the exercises and making sure that, everything sort of lines up and they're getting what they need at the right spot in the book. So it's nice though, because like I can turn over a less fully baked product to her, and I can just sort of step back, and then she works her magic. So the other books are, she's still working her magic on them, doing the editing and sort of the fine tuning, but I think it's expected I'm going to turn it over in a much closer to complete form. So
yeah,
but it's nice.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So I know you and her started a nonprofit organization called HAPS. Can you talk about what that is and like what your future goals are with that?
Yeah, this is definitely Megan's baby. When we first started the channel in 2018, and it may not seem that way just because of how often I come on, but like the channel is really hers. It's like her thing. And she's always dealing with kids, so I think I sort of get pushed out there sometimes, like, yeah, go do something. But I say that half in jest, but when I put out a video one time against Hugh Ross, talking about some Hebrew translation that he was doing, and it was just sort of bizarre. And at the end of it, throughout the video, I was saying, please stop translating, like stay in your lane. Hebrew's not your thing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, I said, as a joke, like join our club or something, HAPS, Humans Against Poor Scholarship. And it was just to be funny. But then we got this idea that PhD students don't make any money.
Right.
Right. They're usually very, very poor. And particularly in the humanities. Well, I definitely know that about the humanities, probably in the sciences as well. But in the humanities, there's often the summer component to their education where they're having to go to conferences or they're having to go on field excavations if you're an archaeologist or an Egyptologist or even an Assyriologist. So like there's this money that has to be brought in to sustain them through the summer. And so what we decided is we were going to do a crowd-funded scholarship to make it so that they can get through those summer months with greater ease. And we were able to give, I think, in 2019 and 2020, she does it, so I can't remember, but 3 scholarships each year, and each scholarship is worth $2,000.
Wow.
So it's substantial for them, and the people come on, these PhD candidates come on, and they do 15 to 30-minute interviews, talking about their research, talking about what they're going to use the money for, if they get it, and then everybody that donates gets a vote. I'm so sorry. Health problem, Josh, today. But everybody that donates gets a vote, whether you've donated once or you're part of our Patreon or whatever. And so you vote for the person that you want to get, once you get the money. So it's a really great program. She turned that into a nonprofit last year. So everything is tax deductible now. When we started it, we really wanted every dollar that somebody donated to go 100% to the student, right? Mm-hmm. And our expenses were relatively low at the time. So it was like, look, what was it, Patreon, or even I think Super Chats, like they took a certain percentage. So we said, look, whatever it is that Patreon takes as their fee, we will kick in personally to make it so that your full dollar, each dollar goes.
Wow.
Of course, then we found out that after raising $6,000 or $7,000, that we had to pay taxes on that. So now we're having to chip in that whatever percentage it was, and then pay the taxes on the money. Yeah, wow. So it was a fun time, but we had a lot of help with that. People actually donated to pay those taxes. I think all of them actually. So it was really great. We have a great community, but now it's a nonprofit, so that it's all tax deductible for the people that donate. But I'll shut up after this. But she just started a sub program to HAPS, which is Black Students Matter, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's I think ends up being like a $1,000 scholarship for an African American student who I think they're new. I think, how did she set it up? And they're new to a PhD program in ancient Near Eastern studies, or they're getting ready to come into one. Anyway, what they do is we pay for them. We pay for their membership. We pay for their flight or their, whatever expenses to get out. We pay for their room and board at a conference, one of the annual conferences in their field, their respective field. And then we set up a scholar that's already established in the field to meet them and to take them around and introduce them to other scholars in their field. So to get them networking right off the bat which is for anybody the hardest thing to do. I think one of the hardest things to do in these fields. So we kicked in privately kicked in the first like 2 scholarships worth of money just to kind of get it going. So it's been good. She's really doing a lot with that. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, sounds like you guys are being really generous, but you know, I've found the same thing, that once you get some viewers and you start asking for donations, you can be blown away by how generous people can be.
Yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
experience.
And honestly, this community has been absolutely incredible to us. I mean, like we self-publish our books through Digital Hammurabi Press, and we do that for any number of reasons. But part of it is it makes it so that we can keep the costs of the books low. Right? If you've ever purchased a book, I know you guys have, but if you've ever purchased a book on an academic topic, they can be very, very expensive. So that Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament is like a 460-page hardback book, and I think it's $34.99. So and that's the most expensive book that we have, but it's big and it's, but that's where, like, if you're looking to support us, buying our books is actually probably the best way to do it for mutual benefit, I guess. And our community has been very generous. Like people really go out and buy our books, which has made it so that we are able to then turn around and kind of put back into the community. So
that's awesome. So I have a few Bible questions, of course. And to the people in the chat, I just wanted to say that I'm going to go through my questions and then I'm going to get to the chat questions. So I'll try to get through mine quickly so we have time for those. But are you familiar, like, have you heard this argument that talks about Numbers 5 and the section about the bitter water?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it's accurate to say that could be describing like God performing like an abortion or assisting with one? Because I've heard this argument and it's really interesting to me.
It's a complicated. So there's some moving parts, and I always like to use the word nuance, and I think it's really important here. So the first thing to do is establish the interpretive model of the person that you're talking to, right? So if you're talking to someone and they say, I'm a fundamentalist, evangelical, I believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God, it's inerrant. This is, Numbers represents like a 15th century handed down from on high set of legal collections, from God to Moses. Like this is the literal historical, this is what happened. Then there's one way that you talk about that text. The other, if somebody says, look, this is a redacted and re-redacted and brought together text in the Pentateuch, and this is Numbers, so this is priestly material, so it's much later, and this probably doesn't reflect what actually was practiced. It's probably like, some Judean scribes or some Judean priests like sitting around and sort of thinking about or writing about what they think should be done or whatever. That's a much more progressive view, much closer to the truth, I think, or to reality. And so then it's a different discussion. So here's what I would say. The text in Numbers 5 is focused on flushing out an unfaithful wife.
Right.
That's what it's doing. That's its goal. So when you think about other passages in the legal collections of the Pentateuch, there's a problem of, and it's not just in the Hebrew Bible, it's in the ancient Near East in general, amongst other places. And we still have it today. What do you do when you don't have witnesses to a crime or witnesses to, somebody doing something wrong? How do you establish guilt? So that's what's going on here. Now, in Mesopotamia, for example, in a similar type of situation, they have something called the river ordeal. And the river ordeal is essentially if you've got somebody that says, hey, he stole my wagon, right?
Or my goat.
And the other, yeah, or my goat. And the other guy says, no, it's my goat. And you say, well, produce the documentation of the sale. So anyway, if it ends up being like, well, we can't tell who's right, the person that's accused gets thrown into the river, right? And it's more nuanced than this and complex, but the river is considered to be a deity. And so whatever the river does, being this, deity that knows what's going on in the situation, knows the truth.
Mhm.
If the person drowns, well, they were guilty. That's their punishment. But the river, the god, is taking care of them. Well, similar thing is happening here in Numbers 5. So the ritual is that you've got a wife that the text says is engaging in sexual intercourse where there is an ejaculation of semen, right? That's what the text says, right? So that's important, I think, to the overall discussion. So the husband, though, just feels jealous. The Hebrew there is like he doesn't know, he can't prove, but he just has this feeling of jealousy. So what he does, he doesn't have evidence, he doesn't have witnesses, so he takes his wife to the tabernacle, and the priest then performs this ritual. And it's a complex ritual. It's actually pretty lengthy. There are two different versions of it, I think, in the text, but it ends with the wife drinking this potion, for lack of a better term, this concoction. It's mixed with dirt from the tabernacle floor, and there's writing involved. Anyway, and she swears before God, I have not committed adultery.
Mhm.
And what she's doing when she drinks it, that bitter water is acting as a tool for God to use when it goes into her system. If she has committed adultery, then God uses that. She's brought that curse upon herself. And so her reproductive organs are essentially destroyed. And so she's barren. Now she can no longer have children. If she was guilty, then nothing happened. She's able to bear children. Okay. So the text itself isn't dealing with the fetus. The text doesn't have the fetus in mind. So if we're looking at it from the more progressive view, then you have to think, what's the intent of the text? I don't think the intent of the text is to deal with the fetus. However, and I don't think that's completely clear. I think that you could make an argument that it's implied, but I tend to not think it's dealing. I don't think it's dealing with the fetus. However, if you're taking what we always, people that we engage with, this more fundamentalist approach, well, then you have to say, as they will, you have to follow their line of interpretation, the Israelites would have practiced this. And if they practiced it, if the woman is found guilty before God of having had sexual intercourse with an ejaculation of semen, then at least sometimes the reproductive organs are going to be destroyed, aborting that fetus. I just don't think there's any way around that.
So do you think that this test is more about establishing infidelity rather than getting rid of a fetus? Like, it's not necessarily she's always pregnant. I see. Okay.
Yeah. That's I think that it's setting up the circumstance again in this literalist, fundamentalist interpretation. It has to be setting up a circumstance where at least sometimes the wife has been impregnated, right? And I think that's inevitably going to be the result, is an aborted fetus.
Wow, that's interesting, and I think it's important for us to remember that we shouldn't always apply our modern sensibilities to these ancient texts, because sometimes that might make our interpretation, sort of biased. Because I think it's from an atheist point of view, it is kind of like it seems like a good gotcha against a fundamentalist who likely is, pro-life, to say, hey, well, what about this passage? Like, doesn't this make, you seem like sort of a hypocrite. So I was just curious about, about your thoughts on that, because it's a really interesting passage.
Yeah.
Um,
And I definitely think for a fundamentalist who takes that approach, I think it is pretty damning. I mean, I think it is a problem that they really do have to wrestle with. Uh, because I mean, you are talking about a circumstance that, again, if they believe that it was practiced with any kind of regularity, it's hard. I think it's hard to make an argument that you wouldn't at least have some impregnated women.
mhm.
Um, so
Okay, so I guess sort of a similar question to this, just in regards to pregnancy. This is something I've always sort of wondered, but in the chapter of Genesis, after God banishes Adam and Eve from the garden for sinning, part of the curse on Eve is that women will now have pain in childbirth. So the implication is that they didn't, or Eve didn't, in the garden.
mm,
But my understanding is that the only way that Eve would have a childbirth that's not painful or less painful is if her hips were much wider when she was in the garden and they're shrunken when she got out, or either that or the childbirth just like didn't hurt at all, or because she didn't have nerve endings down there. Like, is this
yeah,
like ever explained in any way, or
no, and this is something that I think when I these types of questions are so brilliant, uh, because like when I hear them, I think, oh my God, there are people that read the text this way, right? And I was one of them. Uh, but I would have never thought about it to that degree. I would have just said sin, the fall, you know, bad stuff in the world, and that's the end of it. But I mean, that's the reality, right?
yeah,
You have to go that far. Um, so yes, I think that's incredibly problematic. If you're reading it, if somebody reads it with that very literalistic view, and it's similar to the types of problems like, uh, when were the animals created? Were they created
hmm
before humanity or after? And the reality with the genre of the text is that this is an etiological story, right? It's talking about where does shit come from? Like, how does this stuff start? So to take it out of something that maybe is controversial for any theists that are listening or fundamentalists that are listening, if you go to the Epic of Gilgamesh, um, after Gilgamesh finds the flood survivor, and here's the flood story in Tablet 11, Utanapishtim, the flood, the Noah character, says to him, if there's a plant that you can dive down and get, and if you eat it, it'll give you youth again. All right. So he does, but he doesn't eat it right away because he wants to verify that it's going to work. So he's going to take it back to his city, Uruk, and give it to an old person there and see what happens. But on in his journey back home, he stops by this pool of water to take a bath. So he takes off his clothes and he puts the plant down with his clothes and he gets in the bath. Well, a snake slithers up, eats the plant, and as it slithers away, it sheds its skin. And the idea here, besides the fact showing that he's like rejuvenated, is like, why is it that snakes shed their skin? Right?
right. That,
Ecological aspect to that.
Yeah, I think that this was obviously I'm overthinking it, asking this question, but I think that this was just sort of something that's sort of explaining, like, well, why do women have such a painful
Yes.
childbirth? And this is long before they knew sort of a scientific answer to it. And
Yep. And why is it so hard to get shit to grow out of the ground? And why is it that snakes go down on their bellies and eat dirt? Like, I mean, like, that's why that's why it's if having been this fundamentalist interpreter for all these years, for all those years, 25 years or so, having stepped back out and looking at the text like you're looking at it, and it's like, okay, I mean, it's not really that complex what's going on here. uh, if you can get somebody to take that same step back and say, just suspend judgment for a second, entertain the possibility, right? Read it like you would read Gilgamesh. And what does that say? I think that's an important thing. So I think those types of questions are actually really good to get them to maybe start to take that step back.
Yeah, and I think it is really critical when you mentioned keeping the genre of the text in mind, because a lot of the Bible is epic poetry, and when you're reading poetry, you don't take a super logical reading of it and say, well, okay, well, this doesn't make sense, like logically, or like you don't overanalyze it like that. That it's a lot of metaphor and interpretation or analogy, but it is kind of fun to think about these sort of things, like, well, how does this actually work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, just to sort of piggyback on that very quickly, the example that I always give is, when the psalmist says, "Day and night my tears have been my food," right? In that lamenting psalm, like, nobody, even the most literalistic fundamentalist, wouldn't read that passage and say, well, I guess I need to add a chapter to my, dietary practices in ancient Israel chapter of my book, right? Nobody pictures, somebody going, right? Nobody pictures that. And the
Yeah.
reason that they don't is because it's poetry. I mean, Jim Majors might, right? Dr. Jim Majors might do that. He might picture something like that, but
Yes.
but no, the point is that we all recognize today the genre of poetry. The problem is that, and the reason is because we still have that genre today. It's one that we still use. The problem is that there are lots of genres in the Hebrew Bible that we don't necessarily use anymore, and they read like history to us. And so, then we read them in the same way. And I think that's yeah, obviously problematic. Sorry, seeing Jim's comment. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to go through a couple of questions from the chat just so I don't run out of time. So the first one, I'm going to do these in order. It says, from Critical Cripple, it says, when is Dr. Josh going to dye his hair a better color?
I imagine that that's a reference to Megan having dyed her hair. I probably won't. Probably won't. I like my hair color.
Okay. Oh, and I think you misspelled color. That's not how we spell
yeah.
it here in Freedom Land. We don't spell it like...
Perhaps we're looking into it. Perhaps.
Okay. And from Scott Duke, what evidence is there for non-Israelite prophets in the ancient Near East? What roles did they play in their societies?
So I'll give a short answer to this. I'm actually going to have a chapter dedicated to prophecy in Volume 2 of the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, and I'll get into this in the first part of that chapter, just what is prophecy. But actually, there are lots of prophets in the ancient Near East. You can read about prophets from the city of Mari, for example, in the first half of the second millennium, amongst other places, and certainly have them all throughout the ancient Near East. And basically, the role is very similar to what we see in the Hebrew Bible. You have someone who's speaking on God's behalf, right? So divination, and trying to understand what the gods or your God, what they're saying to you. So should I go into battle? Should I go fight this fight over here? Should we, what's the most auspicious day to, I don't know, build this this new temple, all of these things are things that you rely on the gods to communicate to you. And so there are messages from the gods that you ask and get a response. And there are messages that the gods just give you and you have to interpret them unprovoked. So provoked and unprovoked. And prophets are, they can perform both roles. But I mean, you see this sort of thing where prophets are saying, "Oh, king, you should do, by the word of Ishtar of Arabella, you should, do X." Right. And they then speak on behalf of the god. And so now you understand what it is that the gods are communicating to you. And so this is what we see in the Hebrew Bible, right? So, I mean, if you read some of the prophets, there's a really popular story about Micaiah ben Imlah. I think it's in 2 Kings. But he, all these other prophets, the ones that are not good prophets, they're all talking, you need to go up and fight against your enemies and you're going to win and it's going to be amazing and blah, blah, blah. And they're all rallying around, And the king's like, hey, I want that other prophet, the one that always seems to give me bad news. I want one of the dissenting voice prophets. Bring him over. I want to make sure we're good to go. And of course, Micaiah comes over. He says, "Oh yeah, going up. You're going to win." And then the king says, "Wait a second. You always say that I'm going to lose. What's the deal?" And then he says, "You're going to get your ass handed to you." Right. And so the point is that this is the way that the gods are communicating. One of the ways that the gods are communicating, particularly with the kings, with the rulers.
Wow. Okay. So this next question from Nestle it's a little bit long, so bear with me. But it says, you know that the Bible is referring to part of the Bible is referring to a creature with fiery breath. Some fundamentalists interpret this literally and think that dragons or dinosaurs breathe actual fire. But my personal hypothesis is that this phrase was referring to the hissing sound that many reptiles make. It's a metaphor. Like when we say somebody is talking shit, we don't mean that literal feces is flying out of someone's mouth. So this is kind of relevant to what we were talking about earlier. Okay, but it says, but that is just my idea. Any thoughts?
I guess I'd want to look at the passage that Nestle is talking about, but there certainly are passages like in Job and Isaiah, in the Psalms, where you have these sort of mythological creatures. So Behemoth and Rahav and Leviathan, like you've got these sort of mythological creatures that are being referred to. So there is I think looking for literalistic interpretations of them is incredibly problematic. There's a very common motif in the ancient Near East, which is called in German Chaoskampf, which is like fighting or battling against chaos, right? And you see this in creation stories, creation myths, whatever. So in the very popular, everybody probably knows about it now, Akkadian story about Marduk, the Enuma Elish. Marduk is fighting against, amongst other creatures, Tiamat, and it's this battle against chaos and fighting to subdue it in order to bring about creation. And this, again, you see it in Ugarit, you see it. I mean, you really just see it everywhere. It's pretty common. So then it makes its way into the Hebrew Bible in many places. Some places it's more overt. In places like Genesis 1, it's very subtle and demythologized. So, because of that, I think looking for sort of this description of an actual creature, and I don't think that's what we need to be doing. I think this is thinking more along the lines of these sort of mythological chaos creatures.
Okay. Well, that's a good answer. And I have seen a interesting talk from Aaron Ra where I think he was talking about how there was depictions of reptiles or animals that looked like dragons that had a lot of forked tongues, and they would have multiple forked tongues, and that would look like fire breathing, but I think it might have actually been a misinterpretation, but I'd have to go back and watch that video again because I'm not sure if the text was written before that or after. So
I see. Yeah, I'd have to see it too.
okay, so from Dapper Dino, uh, for Dr. Josh, I've seen Sumerian described as highly synthetic, but also heard that there was dispute about weird boundaries. Can the language be described as synthetic given this?
Synthetic. Is there a way that Dapper Dino can define what he means in this case by synthetic?
Yeah, well, word boundaries.
Okay. So linguistically, synthetic. I don't know that I've ever heard it described as synthetic. I mean, I'm not a linguist properly, like a idea in Sumerian linguistics, but in a, I guess, a more narrow sense. So if we're talking about, yeah, maybe give me an example. Do you think you'd give me an example, or
It
do you just
says
Dapper?
it says I mean encoding large amounts of semantic and grammatical info in one word.
Oh, sure. Okay. Absolutely. So, yeah, in English, for example, we would say, I, I, I walk. I guess you wouldn't. You'd say like, I walk to the store, or I drive to the store. Um, but if you wanted to say that in the future, you wouldn't say like, uh, yeah, I can't think of a good example, but like you add a word before it, a separate word. So I will drive to the store. However, in the past tense, you don't add a separate word. You change the word itself, the form of the word itself. So drive goes to drove. I drove to the store. Um, so Sumerian has the verb, for example. The verb can be very simple and short, or it can be very, very complex and long. And what they do is, boy, this is going to be hard to do without my whiteboard. The if you want to say to go to or towards something, you say she, but you don't say it before the word like we do in English. Like I go to the store. You wouldn't say I go she the store. You would say I go the store she. They say it
So
after.
so is he talking about something like a short phrase that's sort of compacted into one word in this language?
Yeah. So where I was good, this is hard to do without showing it on the screen. But where I was going is that what they can do is you don't actually have to say she necessarily in the sentence itself. You can put it in the verb. So you just add a she or a she sound in the middle of the verb, and that tells the reader there's something in the sentence that somebody is going to or toward. And you can put all kinds of elements in the verbal chain that they call it a verbal chain. You can just link all these elements together and make this really long ass verb. Or you don't put any of it in there and it can just be, one or two little elements. But all of those different elements contain references to different grammatical features or grammatical cases in the sentence. So oftentimes you can just put them in the verb and you don't have to put them out in the sentence, or you can put them out in the sentence and then you don't have to put them in the verb, or you do both. I don't know if that answered the question, but
yeah. And I think he had a follow-up question, but I'm gonna go to Jim Majors and then we'll come back to that one. So from Jim Majors, it says, if someone without experience in ancient languages wanted to learn a language like Sumerian, is there a resource that I can get for $9.99 on Kindle?
let me think about this one.
I seem to remember mentioning a book at the beginning of the video.
I think, oh, you know what? I have one here. This one you could get. Yeah. And actually, I should have just pulled this up. So, like, that's a verbal chain right there. Nu, mu, ra, abnyar. Right? All those things that are in the verbal chain are different grammatical elements. So
What
the
is
nu
the-
on the front.
What is the image on the front cover? Sorry, I'm just curious.
Oh, this is a royal inscription. I'm going to try to read it. The lighting is bad in here. Oh, God. Sorry.
Is that written sort of like cuneiform, like on stone tablets? Is that?
Yeah, so they write it. Here, let me show you. Megan, it's hard to see in that front image, harder to see, at least for me. I only have one good eye, but these are very clear. So Megan made these really cool hand copies. So let's see. Here we go. So like on this side over here, that says Ornamu, so that the king of Or. So the one who, man, reading this past the page. Sorry. Yeah, I won't try to do that. Anyway, yeah, it's a royal inscription. So that's what's. I just can't make out the first signs.
It's okay. It does. It kind of reminds me of the Egyptian symbols. That you would see sort of written on the pyramids. Like, I'm not good at pronouncing that word, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, hieroglyphics.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one. Okay, so from a follow-up from Dapper Dino, I guess it says, so is there a dispute about word boundaries within verbal complexes?
No. Yeah, this sounds like something I would want to actually have him be able to clarify on the spot what it is that he's referring to. So if we're talking about actual word boundaries, like there's something called sandy writings, where two words or more are like smushed together. And we do have that, but it's in a very specific kind of Sumerian. They call it orthographic Sumerian, but yeah, I'm not.
Okay, well, there's a comment from Jim Majors. It says, in synthetic languages, addition to a root word to express other features related to the word. A subset of synthetic language is fusional language, one being biblical Hebrew.
Yeah, that's right. So that all those, if that's what we're referring to, that's what all those prefixes and infixes are in that verb, is they're all being shoved in. Or even on the nouns, you have different suffixes that are added to the noun to change its meaning. And not change the meaning of the noun, but to add grammatical elements to it. So prepositions, or like the genitive case, or the plural ending. Yeah. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm doing any good here.
I'll give you a more softball question. I've really enjoyed seeing you team up with Skylar Fiction for debates, and making videos together. How did that collaboration happen? Because I think you guys make a great team.
Yeah, and I think we have a debate coming up this Saturday, like 7 days from now. And actually, he just texted me. Funny enough,
He's probably
he's been
watching.
going. Yeah, he's been going into Discord and arguing with people like he does. But yeah, I think maybe in 2019, I was driving home, and I'd started listening to some of his stuff. I think maybe I was introduced to him with that Matt Powell video
Mm,
that he did, the one that got so much popularity on his
yeah.
channel. Um, and I heard him much like I heard people talking to Aaron Ra or to other atheists or skeptics, and then talking about the Hebrew says this or the Greek says this or whatever. Somebody was saying something similar to him, and I don't remember for the life of me what it was. It was probably 1 Samuel 15, if
Hmm.
we're honest.
Yeah.
And I remember messaging him and saying, "Look, you're spot on with what you're saying. Uh, just so you know, here are my credentials. So I'm not just pulling shit out of my ass. Like I I know enough about what I'm talking about to say that
I,
you know what you're talking about
I've studied this a little bit, you know.
a little bit, yeah. And so because of that, I think he said, "Well, we should have you on the. I should have you on the show." I ended up coming on, and then sort of slowly, I started coming on, and we did those. Originally, we did those like reading the Bible. We were reading Genesis and doing like sort of silly commentary to it, sort of like what Amy Newman does.
Hmm.
Uh, Hers is much funnier than
Yeah,
ours was.
love Amy.
Yeah, but that sort of grew into a. We realized that we make a very good cop, bad cop,
Yeah.
duo.
Yeah.
Uh, and I can really, just be there. I was describing it. It might have been recently. I was describing it as I'm like the bumper, the bumpers on bumper bowling, right?
Yeah.
Conversations like going down the lane. And when it starts to go, oh, the Hebrew says this, I go, bump. It doesn't. And that's my role. That's my role. And then Skylar just does all the debating, it works
Yeah.
out really well.
You're sort of like a fact checker almost, or
Yeah, yeah. But
which is that's good to have.
yeah. And the funny thing is that I feel like I'm pretty open about this. Like, I don't like confrontation
Mm,
at all. It gives me anxiety. So that's why if people ever wonder why don't I do like one-on-one debates more often, it's because it drives my anxiety through the roof. I hate it.
mhm.
Because I just don't like confrontation. And that's why if people have ever watched the discussion, the debate that I had with Michael Brown on slavery from a couple years ago, a modern day debate, it ended up looking just like a friendly conversation between the two of us. And the reason is, and I like Michael Brown. We get along really well. But like, I will go out of my way as much as humanly possible to not disagree with somebody if I can. I will try to find everywhere that we have common ground and just focus on those things, which really frustrates people that are watching because they're like, Josh, don't you know he thinks this? Yeah, but and it's because I just don't like arguing with people. So
Well,
it's a fault of mine.
it's good that you can play to your strengths and that you guys sort of can, fill in where maybe Skylar might be a little bit more prickly, but not probably as knowledgeable as the Near Eastern stuff as you, although he still really knows his stuff, I think.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah, no
guys
doubt.
really, that's why I think, you're good together, is because you play off each other's strengths and, personality types. And I know exactly what you mean about that feeling, because I'm not a confrontational person either, but
Yeah.
uh,
And really, I learn a lot from him. I had a conversation with him this morning on the phone, and he was saying, "Look, I see what you're doing and how you're engaging, and I know it doesn't feel natural, or I know it, but here, just think about it in these terms and try to come off this way, and it'll make things easier for you." So it's been really helpful, I think, both ways, us teaming up. So
Yeah. So I think both you and I might have something in common. We have a bit of a fascination. I've been accused of having an obsession with Kent Hovind. Um, and now Kent has been saying that the end times are going to start for a while now, since he wrote his book, "What on Earth is About to Happen." And he claims that the 7-year tribulation starts this year during
oh, awesome.
during the fall, and he's basing this on the book of Daniel and the interpretation of the dream. And I think I was watching a video that you made about this topic earlier today, but like, what's your opinion on that passage and the prediction, and his prediction, I guess?
I mean, I'm not going out to buy supplies. Now that you've told me this, like I have no motivation. Like I don't feel like this draw this inside of me to go out and buy like cans of beans or anything to stock up in my bunker. But
Or bottles of water.
um but no, I mean, this is one of the things that makes the book of Daniel so pliable in that sense. And Dr. Jim is in the side chat, and if you want to get in-depth analysis of the book of Daniel, he wrote his dissertation on it. So I mean, he's very well versed on this. But I can talk about it. But like Dr. Jim would really be able to dive deep. But Daniel is one of the earliest in the Hebrew Bible. It's probably the earliest apocalyptic literature that we have. And apocalyptic literature has two things that I can think of that make it perfect for people that are hell-bent on like finding the end times all around them. One is that it deals with the otherworldly, right? That's what it's all about. It's peeling back the curtain and saying, all right, look, everybody that's going through hard times got a message from God, got a vision, got a dream, whatever. And he pulled back the curtain, or he sent a messenger to tell me that in the supernatural realm, this is what's actually going on behind the scenes. And everything's under control. He's the great chess player who's moving the pieces around. There's nothing up there surprising him. He's in control. Everything's going just according to his plan. And we know it because it was revealed to me from beyond. So that's one thing that it has going for it. So it's got this validation. It's got the street cred. Like, we can trust it because it's coming from the supernatural. But the other thing that it has is it's very vague, right? The language is rarely specific. So, and what I mean by that, to be more specific, is events that are in the past can be more specific. Like it can talk about specific nations, or it can talk about specific people, but particularly those events that are supposed to be around the end, they tend to be very shadowy. But they're not so shadowy and vague that you can't actually know what they're talking about. So, for example, in Daniel chapter 11, it starts to talk about the time of the end with Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, and it lays out in pretty decent detail the course of events that had led up to the time that the writer was writing, right? And it's much more specific than what you see in other places in the book. It's not just like this nation will rule and that nation will fall. It's like the king of the north will go down to the south and make this covenant, and he'll marry this other, and then the family of that person will suffer, and then they will die, and the king of the north will come back up to the, and it's like, in other words, it's specific movements of specific people, but they're always the king of the north, the king of the south. It's never Antiochus, right? And because there's this level of specificity, but still this high level of vagueness,
Like flowery language.
it allows somebody to later on to go, it actually wasn't about that. I know, it seemed like it was. And maybe even in some sense, it was about that series of events, but it's actually about this. And we see this, my God, you see it in the first couple of centuries CE, right? In fourth Ezra, second Esdras, it talks about how Daniel didn't really completely understand what was going on because he thought that the kingdom of Greece was supposed to be the end. But we know that actually it's supposed to be Rome. It's like, well, of course you would say that because Greece is come and gone and now there's Rome, right? So it has to be Rome if you're going to say that the end is coming.
Yeah.
And so that,
I've
yeah,
heard somebody, Matt Slick, say something like that. There's I forget which biblical character it is, but he's attacked by dogs and he's bitten on the hands and wrists. And he said that, oh, well, this is obviously related to Jesus being crucified through his hands. And
yeah, so it's Psalm 22. So the psalmist, it's a very complex part of the passage. In the Hebrew of the Masoretic text of the main text that most upon which Hebrew Bibles are based, it says, "Like a lion are my hands and feet." Ka'ari. But, and we don't have to go into all the detail of this. Actually, Kip Davis, if you know who Kip Davis is, Dr. Kip Davis, great person to talk to about this, because he's a Dead Sea Scrolls specialist. But like, there's this idea that, here, like a lion doesn't mean anything. It should actually be this other verb, which means to like drive through something, to pierce something.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's like, well, my hands, they pierced my hands and feet, right? And it's like, okay, well, there's all kinds of problems with that. First of all, the verb that's used there, it's a scribal error, right? Particularly the thing that's talking about in the Dead Sea Scrolls is a scribal error. They don't know what the word is, right? And the word that's there doesn't make any sense. It's not a Hebrew word, so they have to, anyway. But the point is that, yeah, those types of things, because we see that particular psalm used in the New Testament in the Gospels, certain parts of it, not that part, oddly enough, but other parts of it are used to be like an allusion to, or a prophecy about, or whatever, Jesus. Well, then, you can do it with anything, right? Anything can be a prophecy. It's just an allusion to, or it's referring to some future event. And so then you can, as long as it's not like hyper specific about somebody's name. But even then, last thing I'll say, like even then they do it, right? So Ezekiel 26, if you're familiar with the passage about the city of Tyre, the island city of Tyre, the text
Yeah.
is like crazy specific. It's supposed to be Nebuchadnezzar supposed to do this.
Yeah, and
And
it's like this is going to be an area where fishermen cast their nets, and I was confused about that because I thought that this was talking about, this is like an island or a piece of land that's going to be completely gone, and there's going to be water there instead, and people are going to cast their nets to try and catch fish. But I've heard other uh, theists interpret it like, no, there's land there, but this is where fishermen are going to cast their nets on the ground to dry them out. So
yeah.
I yeah.
So there's I this is poetry, right? It's very clear poetry. It's part of the oracles against the nations in Ezekiel. And the earlier portion of chapter 26, so the name Tyre, the word Tyre, is a type of rock, right? And there's this sort of legendary idea that, I'm not a expert on the founding of the city of Tyre, but I think its Hiram is supposed to have founded on two separate rocks that were brought together. So, but anyway, that the city is built on a rock, right? And so when it says that I'm going to scrape you, the text says I'm going to scrape you clean, scrape you bare, and turn you into a bare rock. That's what it's talking about. Like it's all the houses and the city and the walls and all the shit. It's all going to be just scraped off and thrown into the water. And it's just going to be this bare rock, a place that's good for nothing more than spreading out of nets, right? But then spreading out of nets to dry, right?
Mm-hmm.
But later in section D, I think, of the passage, it talks about the waters will come up over you and bring you down to the depths, right? So again, poetic language, but if you're reading it in this sort of literalistic way, uh, which I don't know is necessarily the way we're supposed to do it, but you can see how that's what's supposed to. But I think in the end, what Ezekiel is describing is just the city itself being taken back to its original state, which is just this bare rock, right?
Yeah.
But again, this is all like poetry, right? It's so.
Yeah.
But it's certainly what is anticipated. Ezekiel anticipates. It's not just poetry in the sense that he's just saying you're going to go stub your toe, right? I mean, he is anticipating Nebuchadnezzar breaking down the walls and destroying the city. Like, there's no question about that. And that just doesn't happen. And the reason that I brought that up was that it's a very specific prophecy. It very specifically doesn't take place, but yet people, even with this specificity and the actual names, well, it wasn't actually about Nebuchadnezzar. It's about Alexander the Great. It's like, okay, it's not, but okay, whatever.
Wow. Well, I'm sure that we could go on talking about this stuff forever, but I know you're a busy individual, so the hour has really gone by quickly. But before we finish, I will say to Dr. Jim Majors, if you'd like to come on the channel next, open invitation, so we can talk about Daniel and Kent Hovind and all of that.
He's a great guest. He's a
but
great guest.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for your answers. They were really excellent.
Of course.
Well, I think we're going to end the video there. So I have all of Dr. Josh's links below if you want to visit his channel or make a donation to him or anything. And also, I would say to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I just passed 500 subs, so that's pretty exciting. But yeah, thank you guys in the side chat for watching and submitting your questions, and I'll see you guys in the next video.